Hello, everyone. Good day, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Gladwell Otieno. I'm the Executive Director of the Africa Center for Open Governance, AFRICOG for short, located in Nairobi, Kenya, and also a member of the board of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. And I'm very pleased to be inviting you to this latest event organized by GI-TOC along with others at this 30th session of the Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. This side event on corruption and organized crime is organized by GI-TOC along with Criminologists Without Borders, the Academy of Criminal Justice Science, and the Permanent Mission of Italy to the United Nations in Vienna. And I'm very very happy to welcome all these speakers. We're going to be hearing from a wide range of experts on how to address the links between organized crime and corruption through the multilateral system. GI-TOC will be presenting the findings, key findings from consultations with its network of experts on organized crime and corruption. And we'll also be hearing from other renowned experts from North and South America. And we're really looking forward to hear what the Italian presidency of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group has been doing to respond to these issues. So I'd like to start off by welcoming from GI-TOC our friends Dr. Zvekić and Ian Tennant. Zvekić is well known to all of you. He's a senior advisor to the GI-TOC and has held several senior UN positions in his career, as well as being a former permanent representative of the Republic of Serbia to the UN in Geneva. And Ugi will be joined by Ian Tennant, who is the GI-TOC's multilateral representative in Vienna and manager of the Resilience Fund. And they're going to be presenting to us the key findings from their consultations with GI-TOC's network of experts, which is a network of some 500 experts on various aspects to do with working against transnational organized crime. So I welcome you, and you're going to share the time as I understand it. So you have 7 minutes starting now. Thank you.
Hello to everyone. We would like to share with you several conceptual but also empirically based concepts on the relationship with organized crime and corruption, and also the way to respond to these new challenges that we are facing. First of all, Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, it's a network of law enforcement, governance, development practitioners dedicated to improving evidence-based seeking of the new innovative strategies and responses to organized crime and related crimes, of course. And I would start with these conceptual considerations that maybe to some are trivial, but are important for what we are going to say after. And that is that if you look at the organized crime paradigm today, we can see a very clear shift from violence as marking it to much more use of corruption as an instrument to gain profit for what it exists. On the other hand side, the corruption paradigm has also changed from individual transactions, what we know as conventional corruption, to much higher and more sophisticated forms of corruption, which we are terming organized corruption. So actually we have an evolution from, I often also call it habitual corruption, and that is bribery and nepotism. In many societies, it is culturally well entrenched, and often it goes hand in hand with malfunctioning of public administration. On the other hand side, we have the organized corruption, which is much more sophisticated form of corruption, and it assumes the involvement or the use of an interest organization. Now, that can be an organized crime group or criminal group, or it can be a very legal group, such as a political party, a company, association, club, etc., etc. And they are all using various forms of corruption-related illicit deeds from the position of power or with political coverage to gain financial, political, or social benefits. That is what brings them very close to the organized crime endeavor as we know it. So basically, organized corruption conceptually rests on the interwoven criminal, political, and economic interest to profit from the power position and political coverage of illicit activities. Some of the main types of organized corruption are political financing, and that is not only political party financing or financing of electoral campaigns, but it is the whole range of buying off political support, easing the access to public funds behind the door, public tenders, political appointments in civil service and state-owned enterprising, building the whole patronage network of economic and political dependence. Then we have economic and financial forms of corruption, such as in public procurement. In many countries, particularly in the ex-communist countries, in privatization, tax evasion, money laundering, fake investments and financial crimes, and finally illicit enrichment, which is more a classical abuse of political and financial power and position for illicit gains. What we have seen that following this conceptual transformation, we also noted that there is something that we are calling transnational organized corruption. And that is actually grand corruption across borders and is exemplified by this term. It is not just a mere linguistic play of words, a coined term composed of UNTOC and UNCAC principal components, but it is, I am afraid, becoming the predominant manifestation of corruption and organized crime nexus on the international level.
So building on what Ugi has just said and what Ugi has been working on with various colleagues across the Global Initiative for many years, and also inspired by the priority that the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group under the Italian presidency has taken, the Global Initiative decided to consult some leading members of its network. For those of you who don't know, there's, as Gladwell said, there's over 500 people around the world with expertise on various forms and manifestations of organized crime and related issues. And as such, they are a key source of expertise and advice for us in the Global Initiative Secretariat when we analyze and respond to organized crime. So we asked a group of network members to work with us on a new report, which has just been published today. You can see the cover on the screen. It's called All Roads Lead to Rome for two reasons. Firstly, the Italian presidency of the G20 and the summit that comes up for the leaders of the G20 later in the year, where we're asking them to take some of those issues into account. And also because of the labyrinthine nature of the multilateral response to organized crime and corruption, and how we're looking for a more coherent roadmap. So what the report does and what we asked the expert members to do was to outline an understanding of the links between organized crime and corruption, analyze the scale of the threat between organized crime and corruption, and assess the adequacy of the current range of multilateral measures that we use to respond to them. And obviously we make some recommendations at the end. I think the first thing that came to challenge us as we wrote this report were our definitional challenges, and both organized crime and corruption lack widely accepted definitions, but at the same time have a UN convention attached to them with widely ratified membership amongst the UN member states. We also know that they are very interlinked. We can see that corruption is the means by which organized crime can function and flourish. and provides the financial and organized crime provides the financial and social incentives, as Ugi has described, to become engaged in corrupt activity. But at the same time, the two conventions and the various other ways that the multilateral system responds are quite disconnected. And we also found that this is true in research and policy analysis of both organized crime and corruption, which tend to look at one issue at a time. So in the report, we describe how the links between organized crime and corruption are seen at the state level, which at its most extreme could be described as state capture or grand corruption, where the state at its highest levels and criminal interests have become so close to become indistinguishable. We also see organized crime and corruption, or organized corruption, manifested at the local level, which at its most extreme could be described as criminal governance, where states cannot or will not provide basic services, and where local gangs, in effect, control the territory. And we also see, as the other third point of the triangle here, corporate crime, the private sector. So where private sector individuals and entities both facilitate and collude in organized crime and corruption at both transnational and local levels. And all of these phenomena exist on a spectrum, and all of these manifestations of organized crime and corruption influence and interact with each other and are therefore difficult to define and tie down. We visualized it in the form of a triangle here because we see organized corruption as the kind of the central interwoven thread that's common to all of these manifestations and that allows all of these manifestations to interact with each other. So the different definitions are not what's important, but we think the most important thing to understand is the way that they interact with each other. And at the end of the day, this is the organized corruption, which is the complex interplay between states, business, and organized crime. Lastly, before I move on, the other important thing to understand is the harmful effects they have on society and undermining the rule of law, democracy, regulation, degrading the environment, undermining public safety and security, and the breakdown of service delivery and the economy. So when we asked our experts to analyze how we respond, this is the image that we came up with. So the arrows that you can see on the screen are all the different instruments and regulations and conventions that we have to tackle manifestations of organized crime and corruption. And what you can see is that the range of international organizations and frameworks, etc., is quite immense, but that they are usually targeted at specific manifestations, take a specific angle. If you look at the UNTOC and the UNCAC, we're looking at legal frameworks and international cooperation. But we also have, the CCPCJ this week, it's the 30th year, usually agreeing about 10 resolutions on crime prevention and criminal justice, usually looking at specific issues. And you also have other parts of the UN, the Security Council, the General Assembly, FATF, the OECD. But what we found through our conversations with our experts is that there wasn't a feeling that there was one overarching strategy or one convention that really aims at the heart of the issue, which is organized corruption. And taking this a step further, the culture of organized corruption itself, and when Ugi described the kind of political financing and the nepotism and how that's morphed into a more kind of organized form of corruption, you can see that organized corruption becomes not just the central interwoven thread amongst all these manifestations of organized crime and corruption, but is also acts as a protective force field. So even when those arrows do reach their targets and what they're intending to do, they often aren't able to even achieve what they're trying to in that instance. So all efforts, whether it's local law enforcement, regional cooperation mechanisms, multilateral treaties, are hampered by this culture of organized corruption, which ensures that loopholes are maintained, prosecutions are not pursued, offences are overlooked, money is moved, officials are paid off, threats to power in the form of journalists and activists are assassinated or silenced, and meaningful evaluation and enforcement of international measures are not prioritized by states. And one of our experts who was consulted for this study, John Gatongo, who's a very prominent anti-corruption expert and activist in East Africa. This is a quote from him that we used in the paper, and I think this sums it up quite nicely. So what he says is that the normative situation has not been changed when the same bunch of crooks can work around these bumps in the road. And the bumps in the road that he's talking about are some of these international conventions and the way that states take those international conventions to build, for example, anti-corruption institutions or other things, which he says when organized corruption is working well, these things just become bumps in the road that you work around. So our 4 recommendations to the international community are: treat organized crime and corruption as closely interlinked issues, organized corruption, treat it as a political issue, not just a technical one, coordinate the work of the UN and other international organizations more strongly, and commission a committee to undertake an overarching analysis. The report is available online, and we will post it in the chat.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Ugi and to Ian for providing us with a very important conceptual background against which to understand these issues. And I think the recommendations which they're making, I'm sure will prove very valuable, including to Italy as the presidency of the Anti-Corruption Working Group. I would now like to introduce Lucia Dammert. Lucia Dammert is a professor of international relations at the Universidad de Santiago de Chile. She's from Peru. Her research interests lie in the field of public security, criminal organizations, and criminal justice reform. And she's going to provide us, after that overarching multilateral, international, global approach, we're now going to ask Lucia to provide us with a regional perspective. Lucia, you have the floor, and I hope you'll be a bit more disciplined about the timekeeping.
Sure. Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you everyone for being here. It's for me a pleasure to be in this launch of an interesting report, not only because it's a very good report that tackles into an issue that has been invisible for many years in everywhere perhaps, but also because in Latin America it's especially important. As you probably know, Latin America, it's been, pretty much hard by the presence of organized crime. It's not only drug trafficking, but also, smuggling of arms, also increasing levels of traffic of migrants, illegal mining, and so on and so forth. So the levels of the increasing presence of organized crime throughout our cities is just immense. And I think the most relevant indicator of that is high levels of homicides that we are facing, at least in the last couple of decades already. But on the other side, there is also a political crisis that can be described not only in terms of increasing levels of corruption, but also weak political parties, limited accountability, limited transparency, and that has allowed for weak presence of the state at the local and regional level. So when Ian said we have to go into looking about organized corruption in Latin America, I think that's pretty much true, but also we need to see it from the bottom up, not only at the national governments, but specifically and more importantly at the local and regional governments, because those are the areas throughout Latin America in which you can see that the rule of law has been debilitated. And my two main ideas for this is, of course, that corruption and organized corruption is not a technical issue that has been increasingly being tackled as a national issue instead of a regional issue. that no government and no regional organization wants to really point out to a specific government or a specific situation. But we are facing a lot of, weak states and specifically limited possibilities to actually being successful in terms of looking and fighting or organized corruption. I mean, second specific idea is that it's not that the state is not present. We are increasingly seeing this, gray area in which the state increasingly is part of the organized corruption agenda. So the state is not actually looking at the other side. The state is part of the problem. So this fight against organized corruption, at least in Latin America, requires a complete transformation of the role of the state, a complete transformation of the political agendas, and of course an increasing role of a political debate more than, but of course along with a law enforcement idea, because corruption, organized corruption in Latin America is very is being limitedly. There has not been really an organized process of understanding how to better tackle in terms of political issues, but also law enforcement and judicial processes. So this is a really important report, and I think that perhaps in the GI we can start doing more regional reports to enhance the idea to work towards, a better understanding of organized corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for that enlightening intervention, giving us an idea of what's happening in the Latin American region. And to me, it sounds quite familiar as someone from the African region when we talk about weak states and the need for a much more political, a much more nuanced political understanding of the phenomenon of organized corruption, and the fact that the state as it is that it's up for transformation. The state as it is, as we inherited it in Africa, the colonial state, is no longer fit for purpose. And part of our discussion about countering organized crime and organized corruption has to be about how can we repurpose our states to really address the needs of people at the local level, as you also spoke about. I would now like to call on Jay Albanese to give his intervention on the importance of evaluating the current international response to organized corruption. Jay represents Criminologists Without Borders, also a co-organizer of this side event. Jay is also a professor in the Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. He served as chief of the International Center at the National Institute of Justice, which is the research arm of the US Department of Justice. So welcome, Jay. You have 7 minutes.
I just want to make a few quick points about evaluation, building on what's been said. There's a number of people on this call right now. I see Eduardo and many others, and many of us who have been around for the last 25 years. I think we're at an important inflection point in where we're going. Building the consensus that brought us to 2 conventions, the Organized Crime and Corruption Conventions, was really a remarkable feat. I think that would have been difficult to predict in advance, that you could get global consensus on so many issues. You don't have to think back very far, but back in the 1990s, for example, in early 2000s even, many people thought things like human trafficking, one, it either didn't exist, if it did exist, well, what's the harm? And building consensus around around new forms of crime so people realized what the harms were that weren't apparent was really a remarkable feat. So to me, we should always take pause to realize what a remarkable thing it was to get to the two conventions. Now, having said that, over the last more than 20 years, the task has been, well, how do we move those words in the convention into action? And there's been lots of implementation that we're all familiar with. That is building from the conventions to new laws, developing actual international cooperation, investigations, prosecutions, convictions, victim assistance, all the things that bring to life the consensus that was built into the convention. The next step, it seems to me, is the question is, well, okay, now we've done a lot of action and they're ongoing. How do we move from action to impact? That is, are we making any difference? Are all those implementation ideas, laws and practices and work on the ground making a true difference? You know, for example, in UNTOC, we have all kinds of things in there, you know, electronic surveillance, witness protection, use of informants, witness immunity, mutual legal assistance. And these are all very, very valuable things. But the question is, are they being effective? If so, how, where, what's the cost benefit? And those are the questions that I think require more attention than they're getting right now. In my little diagram here of the 5 steps, the question I'm asked is, are we stuck at step 3? All right, the first step, number 1, we built a consensus resulting in the conventions, major step. 2, we realized, well, you know, these agreements, these conventions are not self-enforcing, right? You need actual implementation. And there's been lots of work at UNODC and elsewhere to put those words into practice. And now we have, in step 3, there's a lot of cases of good international cooperation resulting in concrete action, some of which are reported at these crime commission meetings, showing how the implementation is occurring. But now we, of course, are at the fact of we have a review mechanism now, and we want the review mechanism to not just talk about these specific actions. We want to say, well, what has been the result of these actions? And these actions, that is, what are the actual impacts and consequences in practice, especially in financial and human terms, the impact on organized crime. And then step 5 would be, well, you make revisions to your tools in order to reflect what's happened in with your evaluation. So when we now, as we're moving to review the UNTOC, for example, you know, the question is, okay, implementation of a plan of action. Are we carrying out what we intend? Then secondly, we assess the implementation, which is really the process. And we certainly do not want a review mechanism to stop implementation, because the important step, it seems, is the third step, evaluating the effectiveness. Are we having an impact on the problem? Are we impacting organized crime groups? Are we changing the risk environment? So our failure to evaluate past experience makes it difficult to plot a course for the future. So my last slide, there it is. My last slide is this, and these are some of the ways to explicitly breathe life into what I'm saying. That is, well, then how do you move from assessing implementation to assessing to evaluate? And that's by looking at, well, what has been the impact on organized crime groups in places where there have been good activity on the ground, cases being made, and so forth. And there are certainly ways to do this. And then other ways, what has been the impact on risk? You know, for example, in some places, there's been some good success in prosecuting human trafficking cases. The impact is, well, are we changing anything in terms of the size and composition of the risk pool of potential victims? That's an evaluation question. Are we making changes in the size and the risk in illegal market for organized crime, estimates for infiltration, exploitation, which markets are at the highest risk. So we can target our resources, rationally and objectively, and which prevention activities have shown effectiveness and which have not, to guide our future investments. So my plea here is simply that when we start looking at our review mechanism in a serious way, we don't stop at this middle box on implementation. We go to the third box, and that is the implementation, are laws, procedures, cases, victim assistance making an impact on organized crime groups, risk, markets, and victimization. And with that, I will leave it there, and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you very much, Jay, for that. I think it's valuable because it echoes the same ideas and suggestions that are being made throughout, that we need to make a much deeper effort to fully understand the phenomena of corruption, organized crime, and how they relate with each other. In the same way, you've proposed indicators to assess real progress rather than just just ticking boxes on the implementation of laws or the setting up of mechanisms or organs. So I think that's also I think a valuable input into the discussion, which I hope will also flow into the sort of thinking which will come out of this session. So I think in order to hear, a response to the ideas which are coming out of this discussion, we're now going to go to Mr. Giovanni Tartaglia Polcini, who is representing Italy. He is a magistrate and legal advisor at the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and he's the head of the Italian task force for the G20 anti-corruption working group. So we're looking forward to hearing his response to this discussion, and also to give us an update on what's going on at the G20 anti-corruption working group. So Giovanni, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity to share our vision as Italian presidency of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group on the relevant issues. And thank you to Mr. Tennant for sharing the screen for me. And next slide, please. The background. The self-explaining insight of the two heroes in the photo on the screen, the magistrates Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, is today confirmed by experience. The operational nature of modern criminal groups and networks is liquid. Like a liquid, it passes silently through bureaucratic mechanisms, corrupting them in order to reach its goals of domination. Modern organized crime operates by using corruption as its preferred tools. Corruption, money laundering, and illicit companies allow criminal groups, also at transnational level, to handle entire economic cycles over vast territories. Next slide, please. Liquid corruption and infiltration represent a metaphor. Using a geometric analogy, organized crime and criminal networks stand at the top of a triangle with the public administration on one apex and the economy on the other. On the two sides, we can see on one hand, corruption as a way to infiltrate the administration of public affairs, and on the other, money laundering and illegal companies as an instrument in the operation of the markets. Liquid corruption is a metaphor reminiscent of the concept of infiltration. Infiltration is a physical phenomenon that describes the penetration of a liquid through all the interstices of a solid. In the metaphor, the liquid is the organized crime and the solid is our society. The more cohesive the society, the less infiltration is possible. When the society shows cracks, crime gets in, taking advantage of man's weakness. Next slide, please. The 3 and 4 slides describe the modus operandi of organized crime, modern organized crime which infiltrate the economy and the public administration through corruption. The organized crime has stable resources, offer illegal and also legal goods and services, guarantee order and protection, manifest itself through a collective identity focused on the pursuit of profit. Next slide, please. Draw on globalization, new technologies, and cyberspace, accumulate huge financial assets, is capable of influencing decision processes. It ends up representing a danger to the very freedom of the market and the foundations of the rule of law. And let me stress the most important concept. The ultimate goal of this qualitative lab in organized crime is to create the social basis for the collective cultural acceptance of corruption as a necessary evil. Corruption and laundering schemes are recurrent and have surprising similarities across the planet. One last consideration before speaking about the deliverable of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. Next slide, please. You can see on the right of this slide one example of the infiltration in concrete. The first step on a negative scale is the petty corruption, the occasional favor. In this case, it is easy to distinguish between corrupter and corrupted. But organized crime needs stable terms of reference and is looking for people it can trust among the different figures of the representative of a public administration. This gave rise to the second step in infiltration, which corresponds to the so-called payroll on the ongoing sale of a stable function. Hence, the increasingly widespread option of infiltrating of organized crime members into the public administration represent a third step. The third step for organized crime is entering in the public administration. It has proven to be a success. The infiltration has occurred at increasingly higher level, reaching the highest echelons of local, regional, and in some cases at state capture level, national level. Next slide, please. What's the possible answer? What's possible solution to this threat? And remembering Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, we have two possible answers: the harmonization of the legal framework and technical assistance programs all around the world. Next slide, please. The G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group, under our presidency and with the agreement and the support of the whole group, has decided to raise awareness on these related emerging risks and provide policy guidelines for a new era of coordinated initiatives and to outline prevention and repression actions through which these efforts should be carried out. Next slide, please. And this is the first result. We have today a policy document agreed at working group level. And you can see, I can share only on general life because it's under condition to be approved also at leaders level, a summary of the principles. Understanding interconnection in depth, preventive measures, effective and adequate sanctions, support competent authorities, prevent from benefiting from illicit proceeds, protect whistleblower, witnesses and victims, and effort enhance the international cooperation. Next slide, please. Let me say also two more things. The first one, the technical assistance is essential. I choose to share a reference to one European Union program actually is working in Latin America, El Pacto. Is an intercontinental program of technical assistance, including all the chain of institutions devoted to prevent and to fight this organized crime. And it is an honor for me to be involved in it. And one final word. As you remember, I said that the most important threat, the most dangerous threat of actual organized crime all around the world is to move ahead for a cultural acceptance of corruption. And what could be the better answer to this kind of threat? We need to create the base for a cultural change. The cultural change is essential. It is not the number of international treaties or compliances or standards that ensure the results. It is also necessary to advance at the level of social education, of the distribution of options, of participatory democracy. In short, the rule of law in its highest conception. The double use of a legally oriented economic environment in an increasingly multi-level legal systems adapted to modern criminality calls for the active participation and collaborative vigilance of civil society. And this is the reason, in light of what I say, thank you to the GI-TOC for the support, the suggestions to the G20 anti-corruption working group activities and the invitation to be with you today. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Giovanni, for that very rich presentation, which covered a whole range of different areas. As somebody from Africa, I was particularly struck by your insistence on the importance of addressing the problem of the cultural acceptance of corruption, because one of the aspects that we often don't discuss when we're looking at the technical sort of responses, which, as you say, are essential. They continue to be essential. And everybody here, I think, agrees to that. They're not saying that it's a waste of time to continue with the legal reform, institutional reform, etc. We're saying that in itself is not enough. But in our context, we've grown very concerned about the capture of normative institutions by the corrupt. For example, churches and other normative institutions of society, and the cultural acceptance of the corrupt and of organized criminals criminals who have entered into politics being lionized by the voters, especially by the poor, who feel that they understand and feel their situation much better and more closely than politicians at an elevated level. So I was particularly struck by that. I would like to thank all our presenters for very interesting and rich presentations, and I would now like to open the floor for question and answers. You can do that by raising your hand or writing in the chat, and also we would obviously give the panelists a chance also to comment on various aspects of other presentations that they found interesting. We have Michael McLagan from GI-TOC in South Africa, who has his hand up. McLagan, I hope I've seen the name and said it properly. Please, can he unmute his mic so that he can ask his question? And please say who the question is directed at, if it is directed at anyone in particular.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, Glabo, you did pronounce that correctly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Michael McLagan, and I'm an analyst with GI-TOC currently based in Johannesburg, South Africa. So I have a couple of questions or points to raise. They're not directed at anyone in particular, so anyone can answer. The first is, so the general theme of the presentation was obviously the linkages between organized crime and corruption. On a conceptual note, what about organized crime or corruption as organized crime? So would there be any pragmatic value of seeing them as one and the same, at least in certain occasions? For example, we see a lot of patronage networks entrenched in government or otherwise, which for all intents and purposes operate like criminal organizations. Would it be pragmatic to see them as one and the same in certain instances, or is it more pragmatic to keep them as separate concepts? Then secondly, one thing that was mentioned was that organized crime and corruption do not have widely accepted definitions. And I suppose in certain conventions, they are ambiguously worded, very often deliberately for certain political considerations, shall we say. How do you see this as inhibiting state responses to organized crime and corruption? And are there ways that we can say, word them more unambiguously so that there is less room to maneuver for people accused of organized crime or corruption? And then finally, another thing that was mentioned was a need for political solutions to some of these problems. And I suppose, coming from South Africa, where we're currently trying to emerge from a period of grand corruption and state capture, we do see some of these, political solutions coming through in the form of, shall we say, certain factions using the courts and the law to fight their political battles. Now, this is a tightrope. It's not always a bad thing, because very often to expedite legal proceedings against certain individuals may be pragmatic and rational in terms of the fight against corruption and organized crime. But you always run the risk of politicizing the law. And this can have consequences for the rule of law, a central tenet of which is that it must be impartial. So do you see certain, say, the politics of law becoming a problem and perhaps undermining the legitimacy of the rule of law, if that makes sense? Thank you very much.
Okay, those are three really great questions, especially the last question about the risks of what we say in Kenya, weaponizing anti-corruption or weaponizing certain institutions in the fight against corruption. But you've raised three very important questions. The first one was more, a conceptual one, whether we should treat corruption and organized crime as one and the same or separate. And second, on the definitional challenges, which were raised by Ugi and Ian, whether this inhibits state responses and whether clearer definitions would help state responses. And the last one on political solutions. I would invite whoever wants to respond to that to please go ahead.
If I may provide the last one to share very quickly from a national point of view. Our experience is to consider organized crime and corruption with an holistic view, and so promote an osmotic process between the two legal frameworks. And we have experienced this with success. And on a multilateral point of view, how to enhance the answer, we have a methodology. We have to consider 4 different steps very quickly. The first one is the capacity building. We have to construct a capability to understand the threat in public official, law enforcement officials, judges, prosecutors. The second one is enhance the organizational level, institution building, because the capacity building needs also organizational level. The third one is adapt the legal framework, and the 1, 2, 3 technical steps needs to be covered by the consensus building, which I before recalled. The consensus building is the value dissemination on the threat to be understood at a collective level. This could be a first answer to this great threat.
Thank you very much. So we're running a little bit over time, but I understand we have a little bit of leeway. So I would ask anybody else who wants to respond to any of these other two excellent questions to do so.
Sure. I think I was just going to say a few words, and I think Ugi will as well. Thank you to Michael for the questions. I think we addressed kind of this issue in the report on how, whether they should be treated separately. And I think it's sometimes a bit of a sensitive issue, and it's a tricky issue. But overall, we've taken the view that kind of at the multilateral level and at the political level, there's a value in treating organized crime and corruption kind of at the strategic level as organized corruption together. Not to undermine any of those important technical processes that do look at these issues, but to take a more holistic and strategic view across the UN. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I would just like to add, of course, I agree with what Ian said, but I would like to pick up on what Giovanni just stated and what Jay also pointed out, and that is what we need, I think, on national, but also international level is Falcone-Borsellino innovative approach. And this is what we need. We need innovative approaches in tackling the linkages between various forms of organized crime and corruption. And Jay is right in pointing out these innovative approaches can be introduced at the multinational level, including through the review of conventions, only after we have a very clear picture of what were the effects of the more traditional ones that we have been using for the past 20 years. So I think this is approach, innovation plus evaluation. And I think that's the way that we should proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to add anything? Okay, I don't see any hand raised on the floor or any anything in the chats, and we are somewhat over time. So I would just like to give everyone a very quick opportunity, just going around to each of the presenters for one final word, 1 minute each, starting with Ian.
Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that we've looked at these kind of issues in various different ways and in various different regions. But I think the message that we're hearing from everybody around the table is quite similar in that the system that we have, while containing lots of different tools and instruments, clearly isn't doing enough. And if you look at the global initiative, we launched a report at the Crime Congress, the Global Illicit Economy. And when you talk about impact, what we found in this report was that in fact, organized crime illicit markets have boomed since 2000 when we adopted the UNTOC. And even though it was the culmination and a great political achievement, we're now at a point in time, as Jay mentioned, where we need to rethink what it is we're doing, take what we have, and as Ugi said, put some innovation and thought into it, and move forward into a kind of a new phase to see how we can make this all work in a more strategic and impactful way.
Great, thank you very much. Ugi?
I am seconding what Jan just said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jay, would you have one last word, 1 minute?
Sure. I just to emphasize the point, I think we would like to be in a position where, as the UNTOC is moving into the into the review stage, that we don't see this as a report on how busy we've been. The report should be on what has been the impact of our work and how we could improve the work that we have done to make it more effective. And that, I think, is the ultimate question of evaluation. And that is, how do we know what we're doing is making any difference? And that's the kind of work I think that's just needed at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lucia?
Sure, thank you. It's been a very interesting discussion. I just want to say that we really need to try to include organized corruption in every agenda at the multilateral discussion, not only in law enforcement and organized crime type of debates. We really need to include it even in the global goals for development, because you can see criminal issues on one goal and then corruption on a different goal. But the fact is that criminal issues and corruption are hindering the development of democracy throughout not only Latin America. So this culture of the rule of law, this culture of development is the one that we need to tackle. And in that sense, I'm really glad that we are not only talking about police and security sector issues, but also in a broader way. And that's the challenge for all of us, to mainstreaming organized corruption as an issue and bring it to a higher level of discussions. And I think that's a very important way to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Giovanni, last but not least.
Thank you very much. A few words. The heritage of Giovanni Falcone was remembered again, and two messages. The first one, this kind of crime have to be fighted through economic measures. Follow the money, the first insight. The second insight, enhance the disposal and the social reuse of the confiscated assets. This was a choice in our legislation. It was very successful. And today we have recovered the most of our society to legality. And we are really in the sense of the multilateral diplomacy, judicial diplomacy, to be not as an example with the other country in co-ownership, leading by example.
Great. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you all for a really interesting session. For myself, working in civil society in an African country where we're laboring under all these sort of problems that have been discussed here, and that were also described quite eloquently in the question by Michael. I'd like, I'm very grateful that there is more opportunity at the global level to have solutions and approaches that really address the real nature of the problems that we're dealing with, where we're not just, advocating for the passage of laws and the building of institutions, which then don't work, but where we're really trying to understand this phenomenon, which we're calling organized corruption. And I agree with Lucia that we should popularize it at the global level, and that we should not just be thinking about being busy and multiplying activities, but as Jay says, looking at what is really being achieved in terms of a real impact. So in the words of Ian, who sort of summed up everything, it's time to rethink, evaluate, and innovate, Ian and Ugi. Okay, so I'd like to thank you all very much for this session, and wish you all the best.